For 4 decades, John Bamford waited for justice to prevail. When he kissed his wife, Evelyn, goodbye before leaving for work, little did he think he'd return to a scene that changed his life forever. When he returned, the home he shared with her was cordoned off by police tape while officers searched the surrounding area. Not knowing what was happening, John walked in to find his home in disarray and the bed he once shared with his wife soaked in blood. The only questions were, why did this happen, and who could have done this? Welcome back to Mysterious 7, where we'll be looking at one of the oldest cold cases that was ever solved. And today, we have a very special sponsor, Aura, the leading cybersecurity company that provides fraud and identity theft protection for all its users. With the ever-growing threat of cybercrime, it's essential to keep our personal and financial information safe. From bank accounts to social media handles, Aura heavily guards your personal information against potential hackers, data brokers, and scammers. Their dark web monitoring service actively searches the dark web for any mention of your personal information, such as email addresses, credit card numbers, and other sensitive information. On a personal note, as someone who's been using Aura for quite some time now, I feel much more secure knowing that my personal and financial information is protected. Exclusively for our viewers, Aura is offering a special discount on their services. You can redeem a 2-week free trial by using our link www.aura.com/mysterious. It's in the description box as well. Now, let's dive right into the story without further ado. Our case today takes us to Miramar, Florida. It's the perfect slice of paradise with tropical weather and pristine beaches. The city's motto, Beauty and Progress, has allowed it to maintain its laid-back beach resort charm while still being a progressive urban city. Visitors also get to enjoy a myriad of outdoor activities and soak up the Florida weather at its best. In 1980, Evelyn Marie Fisher-Bamforth called Miramar home. Born on March 23, 1947, Evelyn was raised alongside her brother Leonard by parents Charles and Ethel. The family lived in Sardis, a small community in the city of Chilliwack, British Columbia. Evelyn and her family were part of the Chactun First Nations tribe. She attended Chilliwack Secondary School and aspired to be a nurse. Her cousin, Stephen Point, described her as the starlight of the family. Evelyn was also a very intelligent young woman. She went on to graduate from the Riverview School of Psychiatric Nursing and began pursuing her career. She was a groundbreaker who paved her own way despite all the obstacles Indigenous people, and women in particular, faced at the time, said Point. Evelyn began working as a nurse in Vancouver soon after graduating, and it was here she would meet her future husband, John. On a night out with friends in 1969, Evelyn met John, who was a bartender at a local pub in Port Moody, British Columbia. The two had an instant connection. After a year of dating, though, he was offered a job as a beverage manager in the Grand Cayman Islands. The offer was too tempting to pass up, and with Evelyn's blessing, he left to begin his new post. However, the distance became too much, and after 6 months, Evelyn quit her job and joined John. They lived blissfully together for just over a year, but soon Evelyn started to feel the isolation of island living. Evelyn loved John, but she also enjoyed being an independent woman. She found herself needing to return to work, and so she left for Miami. Unable to be without her, John followed her 3 days later, and the couple decided to settle in Miramar, a suburb in Miami. They moved into a newly developed mobile home park called Haven Lake Estates, and it wouldn't be long before they were married. Both John and Evelyn settled into married life and work. They hadn't thought of starting a family just yet, though. After a few years of living alone together, they welcomed into their home a close friend of Evelyn's who had become their new housemate. Together, they lived in blissful harmony. John knew he had found his soulmate in Evelyn. "The first time I saw her, I fell for her, you know. She was just great to be around," he said. For almost a decade, the couple would call Lake Haven Estate their home. But it was here their peaceful existence came to a brutal end. On the evening of January 22, 1980, John kissed 32-year-old Evelyn goodbye and headed to work. Their housemate had also left to go out that evening. Evelyn was home alone, nothing out of the ordinary. She went about doing some everyday chores before retiring to bed for the night. She'd recently undergone knee surgery and was still in the process of recovering. At around midnight, her friend returned home. She'd forgotten her key and tried knocking on the door to wake Evelyn. After a while of getting no response, she started to panic. She called the police. When police eventually broke the door to enter the home, they walked into a scene straight out of a horror movie. The house was in disarray and it was deathly silent inside. Police made their way to the back bedroom, and there they found Evelyn. She lay dead in her bed, bludgeoned to death, her blood soaking through the mattress. Autopsy reports later revealed that she'd been brutally raped before being murdered. Investigators discovered a window that had been forced open and surmised that the killer may have gained entry and escaped through the same window. Following the direction of the killer's possible escape route, police discovered that it led to a turnpike that connected to a main road out of the area. Soon after police arrived, crime scene investigators began collecting evidence before Evelyn's body was taken to the mortuary. Her husband John did not receive a call from police after they discovered Evelyn's body. What he recalls was finding police tape stuck across the door and a few police officers canvassing the area. In a daze, he entered the house and discovered the furniture and cushions were out of place. He continued to the bedroom he shared with Evelyn and found half their king-size bed had been soaked through with blood. John would be the first to be questioned. It was normal police procedure to question the spouse in a situation like this, and he was the closest thing she'd had to family, as hers were over 4,000 miles away in Chilliwack. John explained the night's events to investigators, leading up to the moment he arrived home to find it had become a crime scene. After he provided an alibi, he was allowed to go home. John continued to be cooperative with police, as he too wanted justice for his wife's murder. Police continued their investigation with the help of John and their friends. They interviewed multiple people and came to the conclusion that neither Evelyn nor John had any enemies that would want to harm either of them. In the meantime, police collected DNA from the crime scene and bagged evidence that they hoped could one day be used to find the killer. Although DNA testing was still in its infancy in the early 1980s, the technology was advancing rapidly. Detectives knew there was a possibility that something could be used at a later date to help pinpoint the culprit. Until then, though, it was going to be a waiting game. With no suspects, a cloud of suspicion loomed over John. When he'd taken Evelyn's body back home to Sardis, many people blamed him for her death, some even going as far as accusing him of her murder. The guilt he'd already been experiencing was compounded by the accusations. Evelyn's funeral service took place at St. Mary's Catholic Church in her hometown on February 2, 1980. She was laid to rest at the Chacton Reserve Cemetery. 3 months passed before any new information surfaced. Then, in 1980, Miramar Police Department received a call regarding a similar crime that occurred in neighboring Volusia County. An arrest warrant had been issued for rape and attempted murder, and the circumstances were eerily similar to that of Evelyn's case. When police dug a bit deeper into the suspect's background, they were shocked to discover that he'd been living just 12 houses away from Evelyn and John. Ronald Eugene Richards had also been a resident at Haven Lake Estates and lived just down the line of houses from Evelyn. Richards did not know or interact with the couple while he'd stayed in the mobile home park, but he was no stranger to the law. In 1980, he was also 32 years old and throughout his adult life had been in and out of police custody for several crimes. During the time he was living at the estate, Richards was on parole for a voluntary manslaughter charge from 1975 that occurred in Ohio involving a former girlfriend. The similarities between the crimes in Volusia and Miramar were undeniable, but it was only circumstantial, and without physical evidence, they could not bring any charges against Richards. Although police were sure that Richards was responsible for the murder of Evelyn, they needed solid evidence that could link him to the crime. Frustrations grew as the years went by, and investigators would often look back at the case file searching for something new that could pin Richards to the murder and give the family the answers they needed. Years would turn into decades, and soon Evelyn's case, although not forgotten, would turn into Broward County's oldest unsolved case. It soon became clear that Evelyn was not the only victim of the crime. John, too, spiraled out of control, consumed by drugs and alcohol. The guilt of Evelyn's death was a constant reminder of his failure to protect her, as he'd sworn to do in his wedding vows. In interviews with reporters, he said that Evelyn's murder changed his character. From that moment to today, I've been a different person altogether, because it changed the way I look at life. It changed how I feel about other people because I was very trusting before. Now I'm not, he said. After some time, though, he realized he could no longer drown his guilt in alcohol and drugs and made a drastic change. John eventually cleaned himself up and moved to England permanently. However, he never forgot Evelyn. Evelyn's family, too, would suffer. Both her parents, Charles and Ethel, would pass away without knowing the true identity of their daughter's murderer. In 2012, her brother Leonard died as well. They were all buried at the Chacton Reserve Cemetery near Evelyn. Over the years, advancements in DNA research led to the closure of many cold cases. Detectives who had been working on Evelyn's case periodically retested the evidence they collected in hopes of finding new evidence in her case. When Miramar police detective Jonathan Zeller took over the case, he too wanted to solve the mystery that surrounded Evelyn's brutal slaying. He had been a little boy during the height of the investigation, and growing up in Miramar, he always knew the details of the case. Although he had other cases to solve, he was especially drawn to Evelyn's case. When he could, he followed up on every lead. In 2022, they finally had a breakthrough. Newer technology allowed the old DNA samples to be retested, and investigators could now confirm that Ronald Eugene Richards was, indeed, responsible for the murder of Evelyn Marie Fisher-Bamforth. It wasn't hard to find Richards. In 1981, he was charged and found guilty of the rape and attempted murder that occurred in Volusia County in March 1980 and sentenced to 50 years in prison, according to the Florida Department of Corrections. However, he was being held on charges for a parole violation in Ohio related to his initial crime in 1975. On November 30, 2022, a grand jury indicted Richards, now age 75, on the charges of sexual battery and murder for allegedly killing Evelyn Marie Fisher-Bamforth. He now awaited extradition to Broward County to face charges for Evelyn's murder. Police believe that Richards might possibly be a serial killer and are investigating other cases he may be connected to. Miramar Police Division spokesperson Tanya Ruse said they were now one step closer to obtaining justice for Evelyn. As a result of developments in DNA know-how and the diligence and arduous work of Detective Jonathan Zeller, Ronald Eugene Richards has been indicted for sexual battery and homicide. Ruse added that Evelyn's case is now the oldest case solved in Miramar's history. Speaking at the press conference, Detective Zeller said it had been a whodunit case from the beginning. Finding Evelyn's killer was not only rewarding for him, but for all involved. It was a good feeling, he said, being able to solve the decades-old murder. Both Ruse and Zeller commended John Bamforth on his cooperation throughout the investigation and his search for justice. Bamforth told us he wanted justice. His life was never the same after that, said Zeller. Evelyn's cousin, Stephen Point, said her death devastated the Chacton First Nation, and it was a relief to know someone had been charged. To have this news all these years later, my thought that it's too bad Uncle Charlie and Aunt Ethel weren't alive to get this news, he said. Following the news, the family released a statement to Global News stating that she is now peacefully resting with her parents Charles and Ethel and her brother Leonard. Our family hopes all murdered Indigenous women's families receive justice someday, and that they don't have to wait for decades for closure or for the case to go cold to be solved. Our Auntie Evelyn was a beautiful, bright, fun, loving, and caring daughter, sister, aunt, and friend. Following the announcement of Richard's indictment, John Bamforth finally spoke out after 43 years. In a video call, He said that all he wanted was justice for Evelyn. "I had a lot of guilt at the time because I wasn't home when I should have been," he said. He went on to describe Evelyn as the calmest person he ever met. "Everybody loved her. She was just great to be around. I never had any regrets about being with her." It gave him a sense of relief knowing Richards had finally been charged. "I'm not a vindictive person, but I certainly want to see justice for Evelyn," he said. For John, however, there will never be closure. "I don't believe in this closure thing. One never has closure, as far as you can tell. But certainly, justice for Evelyn is the most important thing." Ronald Richards' actions were undeniably selfish and senseless. Not only did he end the life of a woman who had everything to live for and could have possibly made a difference in many lives, he also tore apart several families through his evil deeds. Since the 1980s, Richards has spent the majority of his life behind bars, and with the new indictment, he will surely never taste freedom again. Today's case has highlighted the consequences of criminal behavior. Do you think justice was finally served not only for Evelyn, but her loved ones as well? Do you believe Richards feels a sense of remorse for all the lives he's destroyed? Or is he the type of person who has no conscience? Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Until next time, stay safe.